What's going on, everyone? Welcome back to another episode of Primetime Sports Podcast, hosted by John Calipari. So in this episode, I'm going to talk about UConn's big win in March Madness, winning for the second year in a row. They're the first team to go back-to-back in the men's March Madness tournament since the 2006-2007 University of Florida team. I'll talk about that, talk about their stretch and their great run. I'll also talk about Coach Calipari leaving Kentucky to go to Arkansas. I'll give my thoughts on that. Then I'll talk about Caitlin Clark's effect on college basketball, how much she's grown the game of women's college basketball. It was really impressive to see. And then at the end, I'll give my pick for today's Masters tournament in Augusta, Georgia. That will be starting in just about a half hour, so I'll give my prediction for that at the end. It would be a quick pick at the end of this. So let's start with UConn. They won the tournament for the second year in a row. The first team, as I said, to go back-to-back since the 2007 University of Florida team. Credit to Dan Hurley and this program for running it back and just blowing everyone out in their way. I went against them in my bracket since I felt like I had a better chance at winning a bracket pool if I went against UConn and they were potentially eliminated early. I know it was a major risk, but I thought if UConn loses early, I could get an edge on everyone that had them winning. Obviously a major risk considering how good UConn was this season. Also, Auburn didn't even make it to the Sweet 16, so it's not like they even had a chance to beat UConn. That was a very disappointing game for them against Yale. Auburn had many chances to win that game, and obviously Yale came out with the win, so credit to them, and obviously a tough pick for me to take Auburn over UConn in the Sweet 16. You had to take some risks, though, with your bracket, and I thought with everybody picking UConn, essentially, I thought maybe I would have a better chance winning a bracket pool if I didn't just pick UConn like everybody else. UConn, though, has been dominant over the last 25 years. 6 national championships in the men's tournament since 1999. That's the most in college basketball. The next best is Duke with 3. UConn's now 6-0 in the national title game in their history. And they also have 17 national championships since 1995 between the men's and women's tournaments. 17 national championships. 17, which is very impressive. So they are an absolute powerhouse and a dynasty in college sports right now. UConn had the best point differential in a single March Madness tournament, and that happened this season, a plus 140 point differential, the best ever in March Madness in the men's tournament. Their average margin of victory over the last 2 years is 21.6 points. Their average margin of victory is 21.6 points over the last 2 March Madness tournaments, which is very, very impressive. Their closest game in the tournament this season was Alabama, a 14-point game in the Final Four. And credit to Alabama, props to them. They gave the Huskies the biggest run for their money. And I know it was a 14-point score at the end of the game, but it was a lot closer than the score would tell you. A lot closer. But UConn didn't have an easy path. Winning 2 years in a row, they had to face 6 top 25 teams in the tournament, and they never let that affect them. They played better in those games against those better teams. As I said, the average margin of victory over the last 2 years is 21.6 points. Going through 6 top 25 programs in the tournament the last 2 years. And this year, even though they were great all year long, in 2024, it was like impossible to beat this team. They were 25-1 in 2024, with an average margin of victory in this year's March Madness tournament of 26.6 points. And to make things even crazier, they were 25-1, as I said, in 2024. 25-1. And I thought Purdue would keep things close in this game. I thought UConn would win, but I thought Purdue would keep it close. In the championship game, UConn took care of Purdue, though. They did not let Purdue beat them from three-point range. Purdue only got 7 3-point attempts up. Only hit 1 of those. They were 1 for 7 from 3, so obviously a big advantage there for UConn's defense, not letting the Boilermakers shoot from 3. Zach Edey finished the game 37 points and 10 rebounds with 2 blocks. Edey had 61.7% of his team points. That's the second most in a finals game ever in March Madness. 61.7% of his team's points he had in that game. In March Madness, he had 29.5 points per game, 14.5 rebounds, 1.8 blocks, and 64% shooting from the floor. He really silenced all of the narratives around the program, always losing in March and coming up short. Very impressive stretch there from Edey and the Boilermakers, and they have a lot to be proud of. As for Edey and where I think he stands in the NBA, I do think he'll be drafted. I know a lot of people, some people have him going in the first round, some people have him going in the second round, some people have him going undrafted. I do think there's a place for Zach Edey in the NBA, even if it's a backup big man for a team. I do think he has a chance at making the NBA as a backup big man. I know footwork could be a problem in the NBA, but at the end of the day, he found a way to dominate college basketball the last 2 years. I know the NBA game is different today than it was 5 years ago or even 10 years ago. I know the big men today have to be able to shoot the 3 and obviously cover the perimeter. I do think he has a chance of being a backup big man, maybe getting spot minutes against certain matchups. I do think he has a chance. I really do think he can be a guy that gets maybe 5 to 7, maybe 10 minutes off the bench every night. I'm going to study this year's draft class at some point very soon to give my mock draft, so we'll see where I have Edey landing, but I do have him getting drafted, and I do think he can be a bench guy in the NBA. As for what he did in March Madness, though, 29.5 points per game, 14.5 rebounds, undeniable stretch there of dominance. I know he was an easy target considering Purdue lost a lot of games in the tournament early the last couple seasons, but very impressive stretch here in March for him. As for UConn, Tristan Newton had 20 points, 5 rebounds, and 7 assists. As I said, UConn ended up winning this one 75-60, so yet again, another 15-point win for them. Newton had a very good match. He was a very important piece of this team, especially defensively. This UConn team, everybody could cover, everybody could rebound, everybody could score the ball. Just a very dynamic team. I feel like every time you looked up, this team was up 15 points or more. Like I said before the tournament began, it seems like they were always up 15 points just like every single night. Nikola Jokic is right near a triple-double and it's halftime. It's just crazy the second you blink. This team's up 15 points or Nikola Jokic is close to a triple-double in the first half. That's just the way these things go. When teams are dominant and players are dominant, it seems like they're doing nothing, and then you look up at the scoreboard, and it's like, wow, this guy is really dominating right now, or this team is locked in. And that's what this UConn team was. They were locked in, as I said, 25-1 in 2024. 25 wins and 1 loss. Donovan Clingan in the championship game, 11 points, 5 rebounds, and an assist. Also added in a block as well. He'll likely be entering the NBA draft, probably be a top 10 pick, but I'm not going to give a mock draft just yet. Probably a month from now, I'll give my first mock for this year's NBA draft. So I'll move on to some surprising news in college basketball, and that was Kentucky head coach John Calipari leaving the program after 15 years to be the head coach at the University of Arkansas. Major surprise. I was really shocked to see that happen. But when the news broke, I thought right away it's probably for the best for both sides to start new. And that's what Calipari said in his Instagram video. He said at the end of the day, it felt like it was the time for Kentucky to get a new voice. And obviously he gets a new start as well at Arkansas. And after 15 years at the program, a storied history, obviously a blue blood program, but 15 years of bringing in so many great recruits and so much talent, winning a national title, going to 4 Final Fours. He had a lot of success at Kentucky, and I know recent years Kentucky did struggle in the tournament, but that shouldn't take away from the history and everything that he brought to that program. And this is a major splash for Arkansas, a program as well that has another rich history. They're probably just outside of being a blue blood program. And obviously Eric Musselman being fired opened up this opportunity for Calipari, but Musselman was doing very well. Besides the last season, this past year he did struggle. Overall, Arkansas was good for like 4 or 5 years before this past season. Musselman had this program doing well, but at the end of the day, one bad season, sometimes that's it. That's all it takes, and they move on and they end up getting Coach Calipari. So that's a major upgrade, I think, and a major splash for Arkansas. I do think Musselman's a good coach, but if you can get a guy like Calipari, a guy that's that great at recruiting, and a guy that a lot of players want to play for, a lot of star players in the NBA have played for Coach Cal, it makes sense that Arkansas wants to go out and get him. Arkansas is in a tough position right now, though. 3 players on their roster are all in the transfer portal, so it's going to be a complete fresh start for Coach Cal in Arkansas, but everybody knows that players want to play for Coach Cal. Look at all the NBA talent he's developed. Here's a clip from yesterday's press conference. This comes from K8 News, Kate News of Arkansas. They had a whole clip of the entire press conference here for Coach Cal. And here's a clip of Cal talking about his decision to leave Kentucky.
We loved our time there. We gave every ounce of everything we had to that job, that state, and that school. So I walk away sad, but knowing no regrets. We left nothing on the table. There's not a whole lot more we could have tried to do.
And I honestly would agree with them. 15 years of the program, bringing all the talent he did, 4 Final Fours, 6 SEC tournament titles, obviously 35 first-round picks. He did so much of that program, and at the end of the day, it might have been best for both sides just to split and go in different directions. If you look at his entire career, between UMass, Memphis, and Kentucky, he had an 855 and 263 record in college basketball. Heading into Arkansas now, 855 to 263, 855 wins, 263 losses with a 755 win percentage. 755 win percentage. And I know there's a lot of work to do now with building basically an entire roster within just this summer, but I truly believe Cal could have this team in the top 10 this upcoming season. It's going to be a tough mock to make. Top 10 is going to be hard to do, but with the proper transfers and the right recruiting, they can get this program on track within a year. They can be a national champion threat each year of this 5-year deal. And this is what he got. A 5-year deal starting at $7 million per season, which is at $1.5 million less than what he's making at Kentucky. But according to ESPN, the deal also includes a $1 million signing bonus, a $500,000 retention bonus each year, plus incentives for making the NCAA tournament and advancing deep into the tournament. He also has $5 million to work with in NIL money. So there's a lot of things here that are in play. He is making $1.5 million less than he was making at Kentucky, but he does have a great opportunity here at Arkansas. And honestly, I listened to his entire press conference yesterday, and I'm fired up. I'm going to be rooting for Arkansas this season. I'm rooting for Arkansas to do big things. I'm excited to see who Kentucky gets to replace him, but I am excited to see what Arkansas does this year. I truly believe Cal could have this team being a top 10 team this season. Obviously, that would be hard to do considering they have nobody there right now, basically, with everybody leaving. But I do believe in Cal. I really do. And here's actually a funny clip of him talking about this year's team and who's coming back.
You know what? I'm jacked about another opportunity.
I'm like, let's go. Now, I met with the team. There is no team. So now Hunter's really extremely confident, but we got to get a roster together. And some of it is a little bit of everything, but we will. It may take a little longer because there are kids that put their name in the NBA draft that are going to go through.
He makes a great point. Obviously, at the end of the day, stepping in right now and only having basically 5 months to get a team together, that's obviously going to be tough. They're going to have to do a lot of recruiting here this summer to try to get guys in the portal and obviously try to get guys back that declare for the draft, and maybe they're still in the portal by retaining their eligibility at the same time while they enter the draft. There'll probably be a handful of those guys that declare for the draft but also enter the portal, and maybe there's a chance Cal goes out and gets some of those guys that decide to come back and play another year of college basketball. And I'm rooting for him to do big things. He had me fired up after listening to that press conference, and he has a few other clips from it that I want to mention.
You never blame players when you lose. Never. You take responsibility as a grown man. You take responsibility. You never throw a player under the bus.
And that's a big reason players want to still play for Coach Cal. That's why players want to play for him. He's a player-first head coach, and he made a great point in yesterday's press conference. Just because you're a player-first head coach doesn't mean you don't want to win. You can be a player-first head coach and still have sustained success like he has. And that was a great point he made yesterday in yesterday's press conference. And here's one other thing I want to mention. This was a question about him trying to build this roster out, obviously in a short amount of time, and here's what he had to say.
Courtney Mims, Big Trail Nation. Coach, you mentioned, and you joked about it a little bit, maybe not joking, in your eyes, that there is no roster here. With NIL, the transfer portal, how do you plan on hitting the ground running there?
I can't tell you that. I'd be telling everybody else that. Well, look, there's going to be enough kids that would want to play here for us that we'll be fine. I really believe that. And, whether I was at UMass or Memphis or at Kentucky, kids want to play for us. And hopefully it's because we put them first. And their families know it.
And that's obviously a big part of recruiting. Players have to want to play for you. And Cal has shown in his time recruiting, whether it's UMass, Memphis, Kentucky, players want to play for him. And here's one last clip I want to mention. It's at the end of the press conference, and he talks about his time at Kentucky and also reflects on what it's going to be like being at Arkansas.
To be at a place like this, to do what I was able to do at Kentucky, I was happy. I mean, I loved it there. My wife loved it there. You know what? 15 years I was there. Did everything I could. Gave every ounce of everything I could. And you know what? I'm jacked about another opportunity.
And that clip right there obviously leads into him saying there is no team. But they do have guys in the transfer portal. Maybe guys would end up coming back. But I do think this was a very successful press conference here for Cal. Showed a lot of energy, showed a lot of excitement. You can tell he's really happy. He truly is. And if you look back at his time at Kentucky, he had 12 seasons where he had top 2 classes. 7 of those 12 years, he had the number 1 class in college basketball. 5 of those 12 years, he had the number 2 class in college basketball. So obviously crazy numbers there. And this comes from Paul Biancardi of ESPN. He also signed 69 top 100 players from ESPN, which is 8 more than any other school over those 15 years. Duke had 61. Kentucky had 69 ESPN top 100 players during his 15 years at Kentucky. He also had 44 McDonald's All-Americans during his tenure, 3 more than any other school. Duke had 41 over that stretch of 15 years. And he also had 47 players selected between the 2010 and 2023 NBA drafts. And obviously this season, there's going to be some more as well with Reed Sheppard and Rob Dillingham both getting drafted probably in the top 5 or top 10. That's 12 more than any other school. Duke had 35 from 2010 to 2023. 35 players drafted. Kentucky had 47 between those years. 47, with 35 of those players being first-round picks. Kentucky's second with 27 first-round picks. So that shows how dominant and how much NBA talent he's developed. And honestly, if you look at his time at Kentucky, only 1 national title is honestly disappointing. And like I said, I do think it makes sense right now for Kentucky to get a new voice. I agree with Cal. It's a fresh start for Cal as well, which I think was needed for him. He's a great recruiter, but with all of the talent Kentucky had over this 15 years, 1 title was a little bit disappointing. It's a little bit underwhelming. But I do think Cal's a great guy who really cares about his players. He's easy to root for, and I wish him all the best at Arkansas. And like I said, it's probably best for both Kentucky and Cal to move on and chase different opportunities. During his time at Kentucky, he had the number 1 ranked team at some point during an individual season 10 different times. 10 different times over those 15 years, he had the number one overall team in the country, which is very, very impressive. But here's the thing, though. Kentucky, even with all this success, and obviously winning a lot of games in the regular season, winning a national title only once is disappointing. They were the kings of the one and done, honestly, to some degree. In March Madness, especially over the last few years, and then in the draft every year. They were losing guys that were one and done players like Karl Anthony Towns and Devin Booker and De'Aaron Fox. But they also had their fair share of basically one and dones in March Madness, winning one game and then not being able to get past that. And that's more recent than back 10 years ago. It's more recent times they've struggled in the tournament. They got bounced in the second round of the tournament last year in the round of 32 to Kansas State. In this year's tournament, they lost to Oakland in the first round in the round of 64. And then in 2022, they lost to St. Peter's. Kentucky hasn't gotten past the round of 32 since 2019. That's disappointing. That's a little bit disappointing. But if you look at all of the talent he brought in, it's really remarkable. And these are some of the players he coached at Kentucky since 2009. Julius Randle, Devin Booker, De'Aaron Fox, Malik Monk, Bam Adebayo, Jamal Murray, Tyrese Maxey, Karl Anthony Towns, Anthony Davis, DeMarcus Cousins, John Wall, Eric Bledsoe, Tyler Hero, Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, P.J. Washington, Jared Vanderbilt, Keldon Johnson, Emmanuel Quickley. He had so much NBA talent over the years. And then you add in Reed Sheppard and Rob Dillingham, who will probably be top 5, top 10 picks this year in this year's NBA draft. But even with all that talent, they only have one title to show for it. And that just shows how hard it is to win at the collegiate level. Right now, Cal is 9th all-time in Division I wins. And at Kentucky, had one title, 4 Final Fours, his last being in 2015. Also was a runner-up in the tournament once. But the last time Kentucky got past the round of 32 was 2019. That's a little bit disappointing. In this year's team, defense was the problem. And he talked about it yesterday in his press conference. This year's team was so great offensively and defense was a struggle that he built their game plan just around playing offense because their defense was definitely something that was struggling, and he knew that they could win games just based off their offense. So he really game planned around their offense winning games. But if you look at the tournament, the defense couldn't stop Jack Gohlke in Oakland, which is obviously a great story and obviously a great run for them. They almost ended up even winning a second game in the tournament against NC State. But Oakland shooting 48% from three and out-rebounding the Wildcats 40-39, that's a problem. And Kentucky had 11 turnovers in that game and shot just 9-27 from three. But like Cal noted, you can't just win games anymore with just freshmen. You need freshmen that are strong and ready to play against those guys that are third or fourth years in the tournament. Because there are a lot of guys staying in the tournament now and staying in college basketball because of NIL. They may be making more money just playing in college basketball than they were if they were to leave college basketball and graduate and get a job in the world, or even if they were to play professional basketball. Some of these guys aren't going to be making as much money in Europe and wouldn't be making as much money in the G League. That's why some guys are playing college basketball for 4 or 5 years. And that's something Cal noted yesterday in his press conference. But considering all that talent Kentucky had, just one title is a little bit disappointing. But that sustained success, being that good at recruiting every year and always being a top team, is very impressive. And I wish Cal nothing but the best at Arkansas. I'm going to be rooting for them this year, and honestly, I'm still going to be a Kentucky fan, but Arkansas will be right there at the top of my favorite college basketball teams. I'll be rooting for them to do big things. He had me fired up listening to that press conference yesterday, and you could tell he's really excited for this opportunity. So as I said, I will be rooting for Arkansas this year, and I do expect them to be a good team this year. I do think he's going to build this program within the next 3 to 4 months. As for Kentucky, who's going to be the head coach, I don't think Dan Hurley's going to leave UConn. I know a lot of people were saying that he could go to Kentucky and make a lot of money. I think he's going to stay put at UConn. I do think Bruce Pearl has a chance of being the next coach of Kentucky, but maybe a former alum. What happens if there's a former alum that could step in and be the head coach? We saw, obviously, John Shire do it with Duke. Maybe there's a chance Kentucky would bring in an alum and have them be their head coach. That's just out-of-the-box thinking here, but I do think Bruce Pearl has an opportunity to maybe be the head coach. And then also, the University of Houston's head coach, Kelvin Sampson. They've had a lot of success the last few years. I do think there's a chance Kentucky goes out and tries to get him. So now I'm going to move on and talk about Caitlin Clark's effect on the women's college basketball tournament. Although Iowa was unable to take down South Carolina in the final, it's still really impressive to see what Caitlin Clark did at Iowa. She completely changed the image of women's college basketball in America. People tuned into women's college basketball the last 2 years because they wanted to see her play. And obviously, she was a great player all 4 years. That's obvious, especially if you look at the stats and you watched her play. She was a great player all 4 years, but she started getting recognition the last couple of years and completely changed the perception of women's college basketball in America. And honestly, South Carolina as well, this season, an undefeated year, 10th Division I team to do so ever, they changed the landscape as well. People started tuning in to see them play. And credit to Gamecocks head coach Dawn Staley. She lost all 5 starters from last year's Final Four team from South Carolina and found a way to respond with a perfect season. South Carolina ended up winning over Iowa 87-75 in the final. Caitlin Clark, 30 points, 8 rebounds, 5 assists, 10-28 shooting, 5-13 from 3. Didn't have the best day shooting the ball, but 30 points is still impressive. Tessa Johnson off the bench for South Carolina had a team-high 19 points, 7 for 11 shooting. And then Camilo Cardoso for South Carolina was a terror on the glass, 17 rebounds, including 7 offensive boards, 15 points and 3 blocks. South Carolina was trailing 27-20 after the first quarter, but turned things up in the second quarter, outscoring Iowa 29-19 in that quarter, and then also outscored them in the third and fourth quarters. Caitlin Clark had 40 games in her college career where she had 30 or more points, also 5 or more rebounds, and 5 or more assists. So 35 and 5 she had in 40 games in her college career, which is the most in NCAA history, men's or women's. The next closest had 10. That is very, very impressive. So she completely changed the landscape of college basketball. Women's college basketball became something that everybody was talking about on social media. People were talking about it on Red Sox broadcasts. Dave O'Brien was mentioning it. 98.5 The Sports Hub was mentioning it. People on the street were asking me my thoughts on the games. It's just crazy how much women's college basketball has changed, and honestly, Caitlin Clark deserves the praise for that. Another thing that's changed is the women's beanpot. It was held at the TD Garden for the first time ever this past year. That's very impressive. And that Iowa-LSU game in the semifinal this year had 12.3 million viewers. That's the most watched women's college basketball game ever. 12.3 million viewers. And there's some interesting stats about that. That game with 12.3 million viewers had more viewers than the series average of the 2023 NBA Finals, which the series average for that was 11.64 million. Also more than the 2023 World Series average, which had a 9.1 million series average. And then also the NHL Stanley Cup Finals, which had a 1.2 million series average. So that LSU-Iowa game was huge. Everyone tuned in to see Caitlin Clark versus Angel Reese. Everybody wanted to see that rematch game. And it's really cool to see how much women's sports have grown on social media or on TV because of Caitlin Clark. She left an everlasting legacy on college basketball. She's the all-time leading scorer in college basketball. And if you look at her 4 years at Iowa, 28.4 points per game in 139 games, which is very impressive, which just shows it wasn't just a 1 or 2 year thing for her. She was great all 4 years of college, but she started getting the recognition in the last couple of years. 38% from 3 in her career, 7.1 rebounds, 8.2 assists. Very impressive career, and for sure the first overall pick in the WNBA draft. Her time at Iowa completely changed the landscape of women's college basketball. And as I said, people were talking about it on sports radio here in Boston. They were talking about it on Nesson in between pitches during the Red Sox game. It was something to talk about. And honestly, Caitlin Clark, without her, who knows if women's college basketball would ever got to the level it is now. And like I noted, the women's beanpot was played for the first time at the TD Garden this year. So women's sports in college are really starting to grow and blossom. And Caitlin Clark definitely deserves a lot of the credit. But obviously South Carolina being an undefeated team, the 10th to do so in women's Division I history, that's very impressive. They definitely grew the game. And also their head coach, Don Staley, like I said, very impressive run, losing all 5 starters from last year's Final Four team and still finding a way to make it all the way back to the Final Four and winning the championship this year. Very, very impressive run. And obviously Tessa Johnson, Camilo Cardoso, and the rest of that team, very impressive to have an undefeated 39-0 season. That was 4 straight years of making the Final Four. They lost to Iowa last year, but they got their payback this year, winning the title this year over them. 39-0. And one other thing I want to note, in that final game between Iowa and South Carolina, like I already noted, South Carolina got the win 87-75. There were 18.7 million people that tuned in, peaking at 24 million according to Forbes. But it was the largest viewing audience for any basketball game, male or female, college or pro, since 2019, which is just awesome to see. So now I'm going to move on and talk about the Masters really quick and give you guys my predictions. So for who I have winning the Masters this year, I have Hideki Matsuyama. He won the tournament in 2021. He's finished in the top 20 of the Masters in 8 of the last 9 years. And also, as I said, he won in 2021. So he obviously knows what it takes to win at this course. And he's getting hot at the right time. Heading into today, he was starting to turn things up as of late. In his last 4 starts, he was 1st, 12th, 6th, and 7th. He won the Genesis Regional back on February 18th. Finished 6th in the Players' Championship back on March 17th. And like I said, 3 times in his last 4 tournaments, he's finished in the top 7. As I said, first in the Genesis Regional, then top 12 in the Arnold Palmer Invitational, then top 6, then top 7 between the last 4 tournaments. And like I said, he did win this tournament back in 2021, so he knows what it takes, and he's starting to find his groove and get things turning around at the right time. As for Longshot, I think could make a potential run in this year's tournament. I think Cameron Young, that's my long shot pick. I think he could surprise some people this year. If you look at it, he finished 7th back in 2023. Last year he was tied for 7th. And in his most recent tournament, the Valspar Championship back on March 24th, he finished second. 10 under. So he does have what it takes. I do think he could surprise some people in this tournament. Obviously, the Masters, it's at the end of the day, people are going to have a million different predictions. I want to have one that I think is going to win, so I went Hideki Matsuyama as my winner, but I think Cameron Young could surprise and be a potential guy that's a long shot that can make things close at the end. Anyways, that'll wrap up this episode. Thank you guys so much for taking the time to listen to this. As always, I appreciate it. I hope you guys are a good one, and I'll see you guys in the next episode. Thank you.